The Greys, Rigel and Procyon, a tentative taxonomy of extraterrestrial humanoids. Compiled by George Andrews, 1990. An article from http://www.bibliotecapriades.net. The information in this chapter was given to me by a lady who has experienced multiple abductions by both the types of entities described, and who insists upon retaining her anonymity. I realize that some of her statements are extremely controversial, and that the prudent course would be to refrain from relaying such explosive material to the public, since it is based entirely on unverifiable statements made by one person. However, I have now shared this with a considerable number of other abductees, many of whom feel that it correlates significantly with their own experiences, and that the information it contains is of such potential importance that it deserves a public hearing, which would be the quickest and most effective way to either confirm or invalidate it. This is a preliminary and exploratory attempt to establish a taxonomy of extraterrestrial humanoids. As I don't have any hard evidence to back up my statements, they must therefore be considered as speculation, though they are based on anecdotal evidence which is in my opinion sincere and truthful. The two types I am about to describe represent only a small fraction of the many types, both short and tall and of medium height, who are at present hovering above us or among us. The first explosions of our nuclear weapons at the end of World War II sent out a signal that brought in a veritable traffic jam of entities from many different regions of this galaxy and of neighboring galaxies, as well as from many other dimensions. Besides this swarm of newcomers, we have been visited by a wide variety of extraterrestrial and interdimensional life forms throughout our history and prehistoric times. However, the following two types have not only been interacting with us since deep antiquity, but are engaged in long-enduring celestial warfare, which is also being carried out on Earth, in which our allegiance is a key factor. The first type is the short gray humanoids with the large heads, which resemble embryos and average about 4.5 feet in height. They are from a solar system that revolves around Rigel. Rigel is a double bluish-white star on the left foot of Orion, about 800 light-years from Earth. They have problems with their glands, particularly with their sebaceous glands, which make it difficult for them to digest food. These glandular problems were caused mainly by exposure to radioactivity during a nuclear war their race fought in the distant past, many thousands of years ago. It is this type of humanoid that is performing most of the animal mutilations and human abductions, which has made a secret deal with our government, and which was in contact with Hitler. They derive nourishment from the glandular secretions and the enzymes they extract from the animals they mutilate, which they absorb through their pores. Our government permits such activities partially because of its acute fear of these beings, and partially because it is under the delusion that they will give us technical information enabling us to attain military superiority over the Russians in exchange for our permitting the mutilations and abductions. The stealth bomber and Star Wars technologies are being obtained from them. However, our government does not appear to realize that when it comes to the crunch, the technology they are transmitting will not work as it is supposed to. It is not in their interest to give us decisive military superiority over the Russians, or vice versa. It is in their interest to keep us in a state of unresolved conflict with each other, the old game of divide and conquer. If no animals were available, they could subsist upon gland extracts derived from humans. As a rule they do not use humans in this fashion, but they could and would in an emergency. Their attitude toward humans is to tolerate us to the extent that we are useful in raising the animals necessary for their nourishment. Despite many attempts, none of our terrestrial animals, neither frozen sperm or ovum or embryos, have survived the long journey back to their planet. They would not attack us with nuclear weaponry, as nuclear war would irrevocably poison or totally destroy this planet's entire biosphere, including any hypothetical human or animal survivors, who would inevitably suffer from glandular problems similar in nature to those they are already afflicted with. They do have the ability to throw this planet off its axis. Rigel technology is more advanced than ours, but that is the only way in which they are more advanced than we are. They manipulate us through our laziness and ignorance. Working under the instructions of the humanoids from Rigel, CIA and former Nazi scientists have developed and deployed malignant strains of bacteria and viruses, including AIDS. The rationale from the fascist point of view is to exterminate portions of the population considered to be undesirable. The rationale from the Rigelan point of view is to decimate the human population to such an extent that the survivors would accept open control by the Rigelans. The Rigelans are almost entirely devoid of emotions, but can obtain a second-hand high by telepathically tuning in to different kinds of intense human evolution, such as ecstasy or agony. This is not done for the purpose of sadistic gratification, as most of them are oblivious to the difference between positive and negative mental states. It is a biochemical as well as a psychological process, used as a mood elevator. Certain types of unusual sexual practices attract these entities like flies. It was Aleister Crowley's sexual pursuits rather than anything else which attracted these entitles to him to absorb the energies released. Crowley was more effective as a medium than as a magician. Some of his diatribes about trampling the weak were due to telepathic linkage with entities who were obtaining a vicarious high from the intense emotion involved in such diatribes. The humanoids that have been nicknamed Swedes are on the average between 6 and 6.5 feet tall. They are from a solar system that revolves around Procyon, a binary yellowish-white and yellow star system that rises before Sirius in Canis Minoris in the body of the Lesser Dog, about 11.4 light-years from Earth. They are from the fourth planet in orbit around the Procyon double star system. The tall blonde humanoids from Procyon and the short gray humanoids from Rigel have been enemies for many thousands of years. The tall blondes from Procyon have a benign attitude toward humanity, except for their strong disapproval of our inhumanity to each other. This strong disapproval is further intensified by our government having made a secret alliance with their hereditary enemies, in order to obtain even more destructive weapons systems than those already in existence. Our government is not interested in negotiating with the Procyonians, as they would not provide us with weapons systems. The tall blonde humanoids carried out experiments that involved both artificial insemination and interbreeding with primitive humanity. The desired result was to combine the larger brain capacity of the tall blondes with the lung capacity and respiratory system of primitive humanity, better suited to this planet's atmosphere. The sudden emergence of Cro-Magnon man was the result of their intervention. A large proportion of present-day humanity is descended from this mixed ancestry. The Procyonians have continued to crossbreed with us at many stages of our evolutionary development, and this type of activity still goes on at the present time. They are trying to straighten out and correct the somewhat scrambled results of their earlier interventions. We turned out to be physiologically acceptable, but are as yet considered to be a psychologically unstable and immature species. The Rigelians also perform genetic experiments on us, but are hampered by the extreme degree of difference between our species, and are not capable of interbreeding with us directly. The Procyonians tune in on us telepathically to vicariously experience our emotions, as the Rigelians do, but the Procyonian motivation is to trace and fully understand the biological and psychological ramifications of these emotions. Their motivation for breeding with humans is to tune up the frequency of our species, in order to help us to help ourselves. Their concern is for the well-being of all forms of life, not just humanity. The entire biosphere will benefit if we fulfill our positive potential, instead of self-destructing and destroying our planet's biosphere in the process. It would be a mistake to count on them to clean up the mess we have made of our polluted planet, or to bring peace by dismantling our nuclear weapons. It is up to us to solve the problems that we have ourselves created. No one else will do this for us. Humans tend to make either Christ figures or Satan figures out of extraterrestrial or interdimensional visitors, in order to absolve themselves from the responsibility for their own actions. This is a self-defeating strategy that does not work, that never has and never will. Awaiting a savior from the sky is a recipe for disaster. If we each do our very best to tilt the balance toward the continued improvement of our species and the quality of life on this planet, we stand a chance of resolving the immense problems we are faced with, but there are no guarantees. Christ consciousness should not be confused with Christ. It is easy to kneel in awe. It is far more demanding to develop the full spectrum of awareness that is Christ consciousness. It is up to us to shape our own destiny. Although the Procyonians are from a specific physical place within our galaxy, they can also travel through time and between dimensions. The Rigelians do not have these abilities. The Procyonians frequently use mechanical vehicles for transport, but are not exclusively dependent on them as the Rigelians are, since they can also use thought processes to teleport themselves physically. Our own legends indicate that a few rare and highly developed human adepts have occasionally acquired this ability. No mechanical vehicle can equal or exceed the speed of light, but such teleportation can. The process requires dematerialization and rematerialization. The name by which the Procyonians call their home planet translates into English as the home of those who travel through time. The stone circles and megaliths constructed under their supervision in deep antiquity were geocentrically and celestially aligned to give access to time travel, thereby serving as time portals. It was also possible to acquire access to other dimensions through them. In order to extricate ourselves from the covert alliance the CIA had made with Rigel, without our knowledge or consent, we must first regain control of our government. At this point Rigel of Procyon, the Watcher who transmitted the information contained in this chapter, intervened to make the following statement. Tyrants have been defeated many times on many planets, in countless solar systems and galaxies. How strange it is that as soon as one tyrant of any species is thought to be banished forever another always, but always, takes his place. The idealistic revolutionaries who defeated King George III in America went on to oppress the Indians and blacks. Many of those who fought most courageously against the Axis powers of fascism later became fascists themselves, as is demonstrated by the present plight of the Palestinians, Afghans, Chileans and Nicaraguans. Yes, you must try to regain control of your government, but if so much as one individual involved in this process has not first gained control of his or her selfhood, it will be for naught. One can never defeat or gain control of anything but oneself. Those destined to oust the Rigelians must always keep track of the state of their selfhood, and learn first to defeat within themselves the essence of that which is tyranny. Through this type of awareness, they will know when to act and when not to act. Through understanding a hostile entity to be but one of the ineffable countless facades, it loses its power over you. Through the ability to wisely perceive a hostile entity, you may gain control of it. In overcoming the Rigelians, one must take great precautions not to become oneself the enemy. Certain levels of conscious existence will always be subject to tyranny. It is the nature of the vibratory rate. Gain control of yourself by ceasing to try to control. Anything you try to conquer, you only make stronger. Lao Tzu was one of our best pupils. Although he was not of human origin, Padmasambhava evolved to such an extent during his life on Earth in human form that his development surpasses ours, as our development surpasses that of ordinary terrestrial humans with their three-dimensional awareness. We have multidimensional awareness, but the awareness of Padmasambhava is omnidimensional. He transmits to me much of what I am telling you. We do not align ourselves with the terrestrial hierarchy that formed around the tradition he left behind him, but we do maintain communication with his very much alive omnidimensional presence. Such communication still remains available to terrestrial humans who seek it with wholehearted single-pointed devotion, either within or outside the context of the Mahayana Buddhist hierarchy. The Tibetan legends about the sacred treasures concealed by the lotus-born root guru for humanity's future time of greatest need refer to physically real objects of power whose retrieval will be essential to humanity's survival in the forthcoming apocalyptic struggle. They cannot be retrieved until Tibet is returned to the Tibetans. The Scandinavian legends concerning Odainsika refer to these same objects. The Watchers have always been here. Those who hear or are touched by them will evolve themselves into Watchers. All cultures go through a stage of high technological achievement prior to learning that everything they get their machines to accomplish can be done with pure thought. The Watchers need no tools to contact any mind. Humanity as a collective entity may create whatever destiny it chooses for itself. These paths include enslavement, nuclear destruction, and peaceful flourishing growth. Whatever path humanity selects is right for it. Souls do not cease to exist. If this planet is destroyed, they will go on to learn elsewhere. If you are free from the fetters of illusion, no force can harm you. To escape, one merely accepts. To accept is to transcend. When you know unceasingly that even in a nuclear holocaust both antagonists, the battle itself, and the perception of that whole event is the oneness of the ineffable in a dance with its shadow, you will no longer need to exist at this level. The entire cosmos is but the manifestation of the mind and light and energy of the one ineffable. War is neither right nor wrong. Wisdom can be gained on any path. Even that which seems certain folly is only a play of light and shadow. There are countless ways to learn. It is merely more pleasant to select a curriculum that is less prone to being painful. If an individual or a collective entity elects to learn through suffering, so be it. There are less traumatic ways to gather understanding. The Rigelians and the CIA have put in motion a potential for a rather drastic mode of learning. This can be altered at any time. Whatever it may be, the outcome is always as it should be. However, this does not mean that we should sit back and take no action. The ancestors of the short grays were once tall blondes. The Great War took place. Behold the bitter fruit of victory. The grays are a genetically damaged species. If terrestrial humans were to survive a nuclear winter, they might well look like that, several generations later. Before the Great War, Rigel was a vast empire, which had been a source of most galactic seeding. All Rigelians were tall blondes. A colony had already been established on Procyon. The Great War was a civil war of Rigelians versus Rigelians, and lasted the equivalent of 3 Earth centuries. A group of Rigelians who realized that the Great War was about to break out took off for the Procyon colony in crude, clandestinely built ships. At that time, all the sophisticated equipment was owned by the state. They were the only Rigelians to escape the cataclysmic devastation. All those who had remained on Rigel were transformed into the Short Greys. After the Great War, when the Rigelians had become the Short Greys, it took them thousands of years to reconstruct their society. They were damaged not only genetically and in their glandular systems, but also mentally and psychologically. As soon as the Short Greys had reconstituted a power base, they launched an attack on the tall blondes who had escaped to the Procyon colony. Although the blondes of Procyon had been spared the extreme chromosome and glandular damage sustained by those who had stayed behind on Rigel, they did suffer some radiation damage during their warfare with the Greys, which was minor in comparison. However, it is this that has rendered their females vulnerable to a disease that is decimating their numbers. The mute telepathic blondes, who do not have speech abilities, suffered more extensive radiation damage than those who retained their speech ability. 2 major wars are still in progress. The one between Rigel and Procyon is at present in a state of temporary truce, in which active fighting could break out at any time, comparable to the US-Soviet Cold War situation. The war between Rigel and the Sirius system is being fought actively. Earth was seeded by the original tall blonde Rigelians, before the Great War took place. The original tall blonde Rigelians were the progenitors of Cro-Magnon man. It is because of this common ancestry that terrestrial humanity is of such interest to both the blondes and the Greys. The abductees who are not returned are used for breeding purposes, and are in general treated well. Terrestrial human females can be impregnated either on board ship or while they sleep in their homes. Males need not be manifested in visible form for this to occur. Both Greys and blondes have the ability to disintegrate matter into energy, then reintegrate the energy back into matter. That is how they pass through walls and roofs, and transport abductees through walls and roofs. Greys have the ability to camouflage themselves as tall blondes through mental energy projection. Blondes do not ever project themselves as Greys. Sometimes blondes are physically real, but are prisoners of the Greys. The Greys must paralyze or destroy their ability to teleport through time and other dimensions in order to take them prisoner. Just as in terrestrial warfare there are sometimes traitors, defectors, deserters and prisoners of war, so there are in warfare between extraterrestrials. And just as in terrestrial warfare there are periods of truce, during which teams from opposing armies may cooperate temporarily on certain projects, so there are periods of truce and warfare between extraterrestrials. Some blondes had high intellectual and verbal abilities, while others are mute and telepathic. The blondes with speech abilities will respond violently if attacked or threatened, but the telepathic type will not. Both types are careful to avoid exposure, and usually encounter humans in quiet isolated places. They contact females more frequently. They may just stare and observe humans, then retreat. Blondes were sometimes mistaken for angels in earlier centuries. The blondes do not seem to age, and consistently appear to be from 27 to 35 human years old, no matter what their real age may be. More than one type of extraterrestrial visitor is interbreeding with humans. The blondes are the ideal choice to interbreed with humans of all races, because there is a common genetic ancestor. Interbreeding of humans with any other species must be carefully controlled, as humans have different immune systems than extraterrestrials. New hybrid bacterial strains can cause disaster both ways. Blondes can infect humans, and humans can infect blondes. Blondes may be carrying viral and bacterial microorganisms that are safe to themselves but harmful to humans, and vice versa. The Greys consider the blondes to be rebellious and unstable. The Greys try to prevent the blondes they have taken prisoner from escaping to explore terrestrial humanity unsupervised. However, a substantial number of such blondes have escaped and are intermingling with humans. There are over 1,000 humans in the United States alone, not counting those in other nations who are the offspring of intergalactic or extragalactic beings and terrestrial humans. Of these, about 200 know or suspect their origin. All humans have some extraterrestrial genetic background. If they did not, all that would exist on this planet would be flora and fauna that included but did not go beyond the apes. The clams, worms, starfish, sponges and other primitive organisms from which the entire flora and fauna of this planet evolved were deposited in the primeval oceans as the preliminary phase of planetary seeding, which should be obvious from any study of the record left in the Cambrian and Precambrian rocks. Throughout recorded history, as well as during prehistoric times, there has been constant genetic manipulation of and interbreeding with humans, in order to breed out our less evolved simian traits. Sometimes interbreeding between humans and space beings has been a success, and sometimes it has been a dismal failure. However, the species Homo sapiens would not exist if it had not been for this persistent genetic manipulation and interbreeding, which will continue unless nuclear war destroys our species until humanity fulfills its potential by learning to us its total brain, instead of a mere fraction of it. The woman who transmitted this information to me described her contact as follows. Kylo looked like a tall handsome human, slender but muscular, masculine yet ethereal. He appeared either naturally or artificially to have black around his eyes, almost like coal. His face was close to exquisite, but definitely masculine. He had a gaunt face with high cheekbones and piercing cobalt blue eyes. He had fine blonde hair that was almost shoulder length. He had a muscular neck. His skin was pale flesh color, with a whitish overtone. It is hard to gauge his exact height because of the circumstances under which our encounter occurred, but it was somewhere between 6 and 7 feet. Here is some more. If you were a highly advanced culture about to invade a relatively primitive culture, you would not do it with a flourish of ships showing up in the heavens, and take the risk of being fired upon. That's the type of warfare less evolved mortals would get into. You would begin by creating intense confusion, with only inferences of your presence, inferences which cause controversial disagreement. You would go to the most secret and powerful organizations within the society. In the case of the United States, you would infiltrate the CIA, and through the use of techniques unknown to them, you would take over some of the key people in their inmost core group. You would proceed in the same fashion to take over key members of the KGB. You would also create great dissension among the public at large, some individuals and groups insisting that they have seen UFOs, others insisting with equal vehemence that such a thing is not possible, and that they are either liars or deluded. You would involve the planet's two major nations in an ongoing idiotic philosophical dispute, keeping them constantly at each other's throats over such questions as whether Thomas Jefferson was greater than Karl Marx or vice versa. You would keep them continuously occupied with quarreling like two adolescent boys trying to prove their masculinity over who is which piece of territory, whether one has the right to invade Afghanistan or the other has the right to invade Nicaragua, persistently exchanging threats and insults like a couple of macho teenagers, while arguing whether one should dismantle one type of nuclear warhead, or the other should dismantle another type of nuclear warhead. As you watched all this, you would sit back and you would laugh. If you had the capacity to laugh. Note by Georgia, the information in this chapter was given to me before the advent of Saint Gorby transformed the red menace of the evil empire into our long-lost brothers in arms and comrades in camaraderie, freedom-loving democracy-demanding kindred spirits. In the euphoric thaw that characterizes U.S.-Soviet relations as of the month of December, 1989, these statements are no longer accurate. However, they do remain valid as descriptions of the Cold War mentality, which for so long afflicted both nations that it constitutes a history lesson we should never forget. Postscript: no sooner had I inserted this note than George Bush sent an emissary to shake the hand of the butcher of Tiananmen Square and broke the treaty we had so solemnly signed with the Organization of American States by arrogantly invading Panama without consulting our allies, thereby escalating international tension back to the previous intolerable levels, single-handedly reviving the Cold War nightmare in order to avoid cutting one single dime from the so-called defense budget. You would make yourselves known to various elite and groups, who would offer you protection out of greed, expecting to acquire more perfect knowledge than anyone else on the planet of this ultimate secret to end all secrets. They would covet you, and you would trust their covetousness and their crass stupidity to trap them. You would do it on both sides of the Iron Curtain. You would occasionally let your ships be seen by some of the ordinary citizens, so that the elite governmental groups would become involved in attempts to keep them quiet, clumsily squelching attempts to make information about UFO activity public. This would result in the mass population losing confidence in the veracity of their elected officials. There would be constant arguments between the authorities and the public as to whether or not the persistently reported phenomena genuinely existed, thereby setting the population and the government at each other's throats. You would have already set the two major superpowers at each other's throats. By subtly causing economic turmoil, you would set the haves and the have-nots at each other's throats. In all possible ways, you would plant the seeds of massive discontent. After you had manipulated the population to the point where your covert control over it was complete, you might decide to go overt, and let a few ships land in public. But you would not go from covert to overt until you were sure of the totality of your control. You would start doing crossbreeds, escalating the process to the maximum from generation to generation. As the process continued, you would begin to have more and more creatures walking around who were obviously hybrids between the Greys and humans. Perhaps in a century or two, some of the Greys would begin to physically intermingle with Earthlings. But for the time being, anything that walks around will at least look as if it is human. This arrangement is simpler, because it keeps mass panic to a minimum. The Greys would not be at all reluctant to change their appearance. In comparison with most of the other space races, they are considered rather repulsive. They are interbreeding with humans on an ever-increasing scale, and there are going to be a lot more 3-month interrupted pregnancies. Those who have experienced UFO sightings or ET close encounters will constantly be at odds with the government, which will continue to retaliate by stigmatizing them as liars or deluded. The United States and the U.S. Senior will continue to play their adolescent prestige games with nuclear weaponry. The impoverished will become even more impoverished, and more filled to overflowing with explosively righteous anger. The wealthy will cling even more greedily to the wealth that they already have, creating a social atmosphere of sheer desperation and complete confusion. To add to that, there will be series after series of natural disasters, some genuinely natural, some human-induced through aberrant scientific activities such as underground nuclear testing, others deliberately induced by the Greys through the technology they are in possession of. When approximately 3/4 of the planet's population has been eliminated in this fashion, the Greys can then make an overt appearance as saviors from the skies, distributing food and medicine to the survivors. As the survivors line up to receive their quotas of food and medicine, implants will be inserted, supposedly to aid in further food distribution, actually to guarantee complete Grey control with no possibility of rebellion. From the point of view of the Greys, terrestrial humanity will have been reduced to manageable numbers and to eternal submission. Humanity is not about to be invaded. Humanity is not in the middle of an invasion. Humanity has been invaded. The invasion has taken place, and is nearly in its final stages. Great invasions do not happen with thundering smoke and nuclear weaponry. That is the mark of an immature society. Great invasions happen in secrecy. You throw a crumb out here and there. You bribe the United States government with a few tidbits, a stealth bomber, a Star Wars system. You encourage the government to think that the UFO researchers indeed threaten the security of this great secret they have. You tempt and tease the Soviet Union with a laser system far finer than any their own scientists could think of. And you always keep that subtle inference just on the borderline of consciousness that the elusive will-o'-the-wisps termed UFOs may in fact exist, yet you persistently repress this borderline perception, and make it seem so insane that there is a social stigma attached to declaring one's conviction that the phenomena are in fact real. While all this confusion is going on, the Greys are gradually changing you over. The inner core of the CIA is deeply controlled by the Greys. The CIA see the Greys as a path to greater scientific achievement, as a way of overpowering the Soviet enemy. Surprisingly enough, the obtuse collective mentality type that makes up the bulk of the CIA also makes up the bulk of the more fanatic star people, those who babble and mush and gush so endlessly. All those who have to cleave to or be fused with some sort of group mentality leave themselves wide open. They have already been taken over. There is a large and ever-growing cult of contactees who think of the Greys as liberators, sincerely believing them to be heavenly star brothers who have come to help humanity. The reason the awful little Greys mutilate animals is the stuff that they eat. They eat pulverized harmonic secretions, what you would call subtle essences. They live on the stuff of life. There is something death-like about their species. They always bring about the death of animation, the death of individuality. How do I know? I am a blonde of Procyon. We were a culture that could travel through time, but also lived on a planetary sphere. And the little Greys, our insidious little friends, did to us exactly what they are doing now to you. This is what happened to our planet. Having come in war, but having been unable to obtain any decisive victory, the Greys expressed the desire to make peace. We had not wanted to fight with the survivors of the Rigelian Great War to begin with, and gladly accepted their offer. As time went by, they said they wished to normalize relations and be our friends. We were in doubt as to whether it would be safe to trust them, and debated the issue for a long time before finally deciding that we should trust them, as they were the only other surviving remnant of our original ancestral stock, though horribly deformed by the misfortunes they had endured. The Greys began to visit us, first a few as ambassadors, then as specialists in various domains where their expertise could be useful to us, as participants in different programs that developed which involved mutual collaboration, and finally as tourists. What had begun as a trickle became a flood, as they came in ever-increasing numbers, slowly but surely infiltrating our society at all levels, penetrating even the most secret of our elite power groups. The one secret that remained beyond their grasp, because the part of their intelligence that was capable of understanding its subtle complexities had atrophied during the nuclear winter that had caused the mutation of their species, was our ability to transcend time and travel through time. How then did we fail to foresee our own future, and the fatal mistake we were making when we first let them in? Just as on your planet they began by unobtrusively gaining control over key members of the CIA and KGB through techniques unknown to them, such as telepathic hypnosis that manipulates the reptilian levels of the brain, so on Procyon through the same techniques, whose existence we were not aware of either. From the start they established a kind of telepathic hypnotic control over our leaders. Over our leaders and over almost all of us, because it was as if we were under a spell that was leading us to our doom, as if we were being programmed by a type of ritual black magic that we did not realize existed. Just as a few of the original tall blondes clandestinely left Rigel when the Great War was about to break out, so did a few of the original tall blondes clandestinely leave Procyon and escape into the corridors of time just before the Greys completed the slow undermining that culminated in their sudden takeover of Procyon. Those who stayed behind came under the total domination of the Greys. The blondes you see on the same ships as the Greys, working with them, are hybrids, or they are clones. One way to distinguish the clones is that they look alike. The real blondes have distinct facial feature differences, and do not look alike. The clones have thick necks and coarsely muscular bodies. They do not have the ability to teleport or to travel interdimensionally. They can be contacted by telepathy, but are unable to scent. They can be given orders telepathically. They are zombie-like flesh robots. You can tell that they are of low intelligence by looking into their eyes. The real blondes are also muscular, but have slender necks and agile bodies. Their eyes are alert and of high intelligence. Physically they are almost identical to humans, the main difference being that by human standards their blood circulatory system is underdeveloped, while their lymphatic system is overdeveloped. This gives them stronger immune systems than terrestrial humans. The hybrids are in an intermediate state between the real blondes and the clones. After what has happened to Procyon, no true blonde would collaborate voluntarily with the Greys. The Greys have taken some prisoners of war, who have no choice in the matter, and are forced to work with them in order to survive, with the hope of escaping. There are also a few blondes who have become degenerate renegades, space pirates and mercenaries who sell their services to the highest bidder. But many of us remain free, and continue the fight to the finish with the life form that has become our hereditary enemy. He chooses to remain in exile in the corridors of time, where they cannot reach us, rather than to live under the domination of the insidious Greys. It is dangerous for us to venture forth from the corridors of time, but occasionally we do so for a hit-and-run strike, similar in nature to a cosmic version of terrestrial guerrilla warfare. We must periodically enter a substantial physical form for a period of repose, or to breed progeny, in order to continue to survive, but otherwise we constantly travel the vast corridors of time. That is why we may appear to fade in and out like holographic images to human perception. What I have come here to communicate, if only to one or two people or a small group, is that what is now in the process of happening to your culture, also happened to ours. It is the same fate our own culture suffered. And the blondes you see with the Greys are either hybrids, clones, or prisoners of war. Because no true blonde who got out untouched, unscathed, uncrossed with those Greys would ever be with them. He or she would prefer to be in a state of non-existence. Besides the blondes and the Greys, ships from many other space cultures are watching planet Earth at this time with extreme interest. Scientists from other space cultures are studying what is going on here during this decisive period of your history. If your elected representatives had not so stupidly made a deal with the only aliens willing to provide them with weapons systems, with the short-sighted goal of overpowering the Russians, the Greys would not have achieved their present dominance, and you would now be exchanging ambassadors with a wide variety of space cultures. What I want to get across to you is that the ultimate evil, which underlies all the negativity in the cosmos, finds expression in that masked form of psychological complacency which leads an individual to adhere to a group philosophy rather than to think things through for oneself. Those who feel safe and comfortable in no matter what belief system merely because many others adhere to it, who get together and form an arrogant self-righteous group convinced it has a monopoly on the truth, and who are ready to persecute, kill or stifle anyone who challenges that group's philosophy, have formed an alliance with the ultimate evil, whether they know it or not. It is the self-righteousness and implacability of certain elite power groups like the CIA and the KGB, certain organized religions, and certain so-called lunatic French groups such as some of the more fanatical star people, which are so objectionable. It is as if the self-righteous elite power groups and the self-righteous lunatic French groups were mirror opposites of each other, and thus equivalent to each other. The elite groups see the French groups as their enemies, and vice versa, but they each think of themselves as a chosen, special group. As soon as you become involved in a belief system that you are a chosen, special group, who are as lords over the common folk because of your secret knowledge, you are on your way to a fall. That type of attitude plants the seed of destruction in any society or culture, leaving it vulnerable to overthrow by those oppressed within its boundaries, as well as by outside forces. All cultures who have elite groups at odds with each other, and with the population at large, sooner or later collapse from either internal or external pressures. A healthy organism does not encapsulate portions of itself off that cease to interchange freely with other portions of its body. This type of condition is a prelude to cancer, whether it occurs in an individual or in a society. The only chance of retaining your freedom is for the awareness of this principle to penetrate the consciousness of humanity. It is a pearl of wisdom treasured by those who have attained the ability to travel through time and other life cycles. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, begin again only to die again, over and over and over. It isn't only a problem of this planet. It's a problem that must be faced by all civilizations in the course of their development, no matter where they may be located in the cosmos. Everyone wants that slightly larger piece of the pie than their neighbor for themselves, and eventually this tendency always culminates in choking them. Sooner or later this will be the undoing of the Greys as well, thereby enabling us to return in triumph from our exile in the quarters of time. The Greys do not see and are incapable of understanding their own fundamental error, that the very weakness they seize upon in humanity is their own inherent weakness, the blind spot that inevitably seals their doom. Minerals evolve into plants, plants into animals, animals into humans, and humans into angelic energy forms. But to try to force a rock, when it is in the state of being a rock, to perform like a plant is utterly futile. To try and change the arrogant mentality of a self-righteous government official or of a fanatical star person is as futile as trying to make a rock perform like a plant, unless at this stage, one thing you can do is to provide the public with as much information as possible. This will make it more difficult for the collaborators and Greys in disguise within the government to continue to work against humanity in favor of the Greys. Tell the public how to put their minds into a state that the Greys cannot penetrate, by focusing the mind on powerful imagery, different for each individual. The only way to victory is through the strength of your consciousness. When genetic or other manipulations are being performed on the abductees, the Greys expect them to cringe in fear, and derive a second-hand high from the intensity of the emotions expressed. If instead of cringing in fear, an abductee can put his or her mind elsewhere, focusing attention on dynamic protective imagery of a religious or mystical nature, it decreases the gratification that the Greys are getting from their second-hand high, and it confuses them. Center the consciousness on something so different from what they expect that it puzzles them. No matter what the physical situation may be, it is essential to send this SOS telepathic message to the higher powers protective of humanity without becoming entangled in negative emotions such as fear, rage or hatred. Negative emotions not only diminish the effectiveness of one's SOS message to the higher powers in the universe, they are the type of response that the Greys are used to evoking and are expert at manipulating. If you combat the Greys with hatred in your heart, you become like them, and further entangled with them, instead of free from them. A difficulty with the viewpoint of many of the adherents of organized religions is that they tend to perceive the Greys as demons, and therefore to hate them. Although to some extent this analogy is valid, hatred is a form of attachment, a negative emotion they know well how to use to bind you to them. A more correct perception is that the Greys are a species that is terminally ill, having exhausted their DNA, and are therefore in a state of desperation. That is why they are so ruthless in their genetic and other experimentation. Their physical bodies are degenerating from generation to generation. The Greys do not have progeria, but their DNA is running out, and no longer replicates properly, so they are unable to replenish themselves. It is not progeria, but it is similar to progeria, almost like a progeria of the entire species. It should be remembered that aggressive behavior or attempts at physical resistance during an abduction may result in death. The Greys have no more compunction about taking human life than humans have about taking reptilian life. During the time that one is in their power, one has no more control over what happens physically than does the victim of a human kidnapper or rapist. Their chosen ones are attempting to sugarcoat the bitter pill and get you all to stand in line to be processed without any effective resistance, like cattle into hamburger, depicting abduction by the Greys as a glorious experience that everyone should have. These chosen ones are the bellwethers that Charles Porch referred to. There are other ET groups you would be happy to work with and travel in the vehicles of, but the track record that the Greys have left behind them leaves no room for doubt as to their malignancy. The only reason the Greys have such a degree of dominance over you is because your elected officials stupidly made clandestine agreements with them, binding you to them in an exclusive alliance that is respected by other space races, allowing them to install themselves in underground bases impregnable to your weaponry, a situation you must now find a way to extricate yourselves from. In antiquity this planet was divided into sectors between 4 different groups: blondes, greys, large lizard-like beings from the Capella system, beings from the Arcturus system. These groups still consider themselves to be the owners of this planet. They do not recognize the human claim to ownership. However, some of us do recognize human rights, as well as the rights of other life forms. There is at present an alliance between the Talbons and the large lizard-like beings from the Capella system to drive out the Greys. The beings from the Arcturus system are at present neutral observers, not participating in the conflict. The blondes and Capellans have deep moral repugnance for the activities of the Greys on this planet at this time, and are willing to help humanity, if humanity will take effective steps to stop its pollution of the planetary environment. The Greys have become a criminal species, and will be treated as such. However, any species that pollutes its own environment to the point of endangering the survival of its planetary biosphere is also guilty of a cosmic crime. The Space Shuttle Challenger was destroyed because one of its scheduled operations was an experimental attempt to dispose of nuclear waste by projecting it into outer space. Vehicles of other cultures could collide with canisters of nuclear waste projected into outer space. Canisters could also be broken open by meteor showers, and contaminate whole zones of the universe. It was not an intelligent idea to try and shoot a canister out from the space shuttle. It is not enough to launch canisters beyond the periphery of your solar system. There must be a pre-planned crash on a specific target. The only safe way is to select a system that is about to supernova, and then send an unmanned spaceship loaded with nuclear waste on a collision course directly into that solar system's central sun. The second best solution would be to send a ship on a collision course into the sun of a solar system where conditions are incompatible with the existence of life forms. To send it into your own sun could cause a solar flare that would reduce all forms of life on Earth to dust and ashes. The nuclear waste produced on Earth must be kept on Earth until a safe way to project it to a suitable target area is found. Jupiter is the closest target to Earth that is acceptable for this purpose. Enochian is the lingua franca of the space races, much as Swahili was the lingua franca of the many African languages. Enochian is the correct time-tested traditional way for Earthlings to communicate with extraterrestrials. In the Golden Dawn Enochian system, the Great King of Air is the appropriate intermediary to be called upon as a benign go-between in negotiations between Earthlings and extraterrestrials. Enochian was the ancestral root language of the original Blondes on Rigel before the Great War. Although active resistance to the Greys would not be advisable at the present time, due to their technological advantage, this does not mean that you should surrender. It means that you should focus your attention on the different techniques of passive resistance that may be applicable to the situation, making the fullest possible use of your individuality, which so puzzles and confuses their collective hive mentality. As collective thought patterns enhance the ability of the Greys to manipulate you, original thinkers acting on their own are more likely to have success than mass movements led by leaders who do everyone else's thinking for them. In preventing the takeover of your planet as a colony ruled by Grey overlords, you should go back through your own history and learn what you can from the techniques used. Passive resistance used to bring about the independence of India by the American Indians and blacks during their oppression in the United States by the blacks in South Africa at the present time by the French resistance during the Nazi occupation. And anywhere else in your historical records where there are lessons of this nature to be learned. The point of passive resistance is to endure, to survive until the moment when it becomes possible to switch over to active resistance because outside help has come, being careful to avoid the mistake of the citizens of Budapest, who rose up believing propaganda assurances that the United States would support their uprising, only to be crushed by Soviet tanks when no such help was forthcoming. Prematurely triggered active resistance would be a disaster that would enable the Greys to perpetuate their colonization of this planet, exactly the type of situation they would try to bring about. Beware of zealots with an obsessive hatred of the Greys, who may have been subconsciously programmed by the Greys to act as agents provocators. If you get all those sincerely devoted to resistance together into one place, it is much easier to wipe them out. If the resistance remains disseminated among the population at large, it is more difficult to round them up. Don't add to the superiority of the Grey position by playing into their hands. And remember that although their technology is far in advance of yours, you do vastly outnumber them, and can overextend them. They are already overextended elsewhere, and unable to commit further forces to this area of the universe, so those already here must operate without reinforcements coming to them. You are so far outstripped in terms of physical weaponry that you must find a source of strength that transcends the physical, such as techniques of center and consciousness on powerfully motivating imagery, which would be different from one individual to another. For the religiously oriented, it might be a key event in the life of Jesus, Buddha, Mohammed, Moses, or whoever the appropriate figure would be in the tradition one's belief system is centered around. For those who are not religiously oriented, it would be whatever figure that person sincerely admires as representing what is best in humanity, whether it be an artist or inventor or other type of benevolent leader of society. If the admiration is not wholeheartedly sincere, the intensity with which the attention is focused on the symbolic image in which one wishes to take refuge is not sufficient to be of much use as protection, nor can the attention be maintained for long. The degree of protection given by such imagery depends largely on the intensity and endurance of the single-pointed attention. So it is best to choose whatever figure you genuinely feel spontaneous admiration for, whatever image makes your heart sing and makes you feel at one with the infinite. That will always work, and is all we can do for now. An example of the type of attitude that the Greys find most confusing is the classic Buddhist discipline of meditating on a bloated corpse until one roars with laughter upon realizing what a complete cosmic joke existence is. The most likely way to extricate oneself and others from a potentially disastrous situation is to keep the consciousness centered and the heart still, realizing the situation to be the illusion that it is. Do not act out of fear, thereby ensuring the victory of the opponent. If one allows oneself to be intimidated, the inevitable result is death. In no matter what type of situation, retain your sense of humor and perspective. Learn to apply the TACHI disciplines in non-physical fashion. Center yourself, then act from that center. Since the Greys have mastered much deeper techniques of hypnosis than humans have, their takeover of human consciousness can only be prevented by strong imagery of a religious or mystical nature. Your contemporary hypnosis works within the mammalian portions of your brain, which in terms of evolutionary development are the more recently acquired portions. Being partially reptilian themselves, the Greys know how to manipulate the reptilian level of your brain, which is the most basic and ancient level. The only way to counteract such manipulation is by activating the most high of the highest levels of consciousness accessible to you at your present stage of development. If one is unable to maintain an image evoking that highest level of consciousness firmly in one's thoughts, their hypnosis can bypass the higher levels of your evolutionary development and take control of the deep reptilian level, in this fashion overpowering an individual's true will and obliterating the integrity of the soul. That is how they took over key officials of the CIA, KGB, and other powerful elite groups within your social structure. They only need to control the elite at the top of the social pyramid, the top 1% of the population, in order to control us all. A person enslaved in this fashion can be made to do things that your type of hypnosis could not make them do, such as murdering their closest friends or family members. Having gained control over the reptilian level of consciousness, they temporarily paralyze all portions of the mammalian brain higher than the ape level, then activate the ape level's more violent responses, such as territorialism, greed, lust or rage. Humans can be made to respond like apes, unless they are able to resist the attempt to take them over by activating the level of consciousness that corresponds to the crown chakra. Any attempt to fight back at the ape level ensures the success of the Greys. The ape level belligerence, territorialism, and posturing for purposes of prestige and dominance, which are unfortunately so characteristic of the US-UR relationship on both sides, deliver the population of this planet bound hand and foot into the power of the Greys. After having destroyed approximately 3/4 of the present population through the introduction of viral diseases and the induction of assorted catastrophes, the Greys would not even need to make an overt appearance as saviors from the skies. They could replace humans with hybrids unobtrusively. It could be done so gradually that no one would realize what was happening. The transition from humans to hybrids could be so subtle and seamless that the changeover would never be noticed. It would not even be mentioned in the history books, as scientists would assume that the physical and mental changes were the result of naturally occurring evolution. Human history would become hybrid history without anyone understanding what had actually occurred. The governments might even continue to deny the existence of UFOs. All that would be needed would be to continue the process that is already in operation. Some researchers are aware of the fact that the hybrids which turn out to resemble the Greys are removed from their mothers and taken elsewhere, but very few are aware that the hybrids which turn out to resemble humans are left to grow up in human society. Before taking hybrids back to their home base to give a much-needed genetic boost to their own ancestral stock, they would want to carry out intensive long-range studies. Certain questions would need to be answered, such as, are the hybrids psychologically stable? Disease-resistant? Productive? Aggressive? They would want to observe the interplay between humans and hybrids, in order to make sure that the hybrids had the qualities necessary to become leaders in human society. In general, Grey/human hybrids would require less food and sleep than terrestrial humans. They would tend to be more intelligent and slender, but emotionally cold. This does not mean that any human with these characteristics is necessarily a hybrid. As many as 3% of the present population may already be hybrids. All the Grey would have to do would be to continue doing exactly what they are doing, to keep boosting that percentage bit by bit, with an occasional sudden jump in the wake of seemingly natural catastrophes, until the original human population has been 100% replaced by hybrids. Why do I know so well how such an operation is carried out? The process is quite similar to that by which the blondes replaced Neanderthal man with Cro-Magnon man. However, the intelligence of terrestrial humanity has now evolved to the point where it has a choice in the matter. By understanding the long-term hive mind strategy of the Greys, individual humans who attain multidimensional awareness can circumvent and short-circuit it. If enough individual humans do this, and refrain from quarreling over whether the state of multidimensional awareness is to be called Christ consciousness or any of the other names it has in the different traditions, uniting together from all traditions to liberate the planet, the Greys will be obliged to seek elsewhere in the cosmos for a slave species they can genetically manipulate. At some point help may come from outside, from my own and or some of the other space races. There may also be revolt within the ranks of the Greys, based on widespread discontent with their rigid insect-like hierarchical caste system. In the process of infiltrating a species, the Greys cannot avoid being influenced by that species, and some of them who had never thought of questioning authority are beginning to do so, due to the influence of human contact. The Greys are having problems not only within their own ranks, but also on other planets they have colonized. As a species they are afflicted with severe, perhaps terminal, health problems. They have substantial captive populations of blonde, human and other prisoners of war, eager to join a revolt at the slightest opportunity. There's no reason why one should not send out telepathic appeals for help, in the form of prayer or meditation, or in whatever way is appropriate to the individual, to the higher forces in the cosmos. They do exist, and are sensitive to such signals. There are extraterrestrial and other dimensional cultures capable of harnessing the innate power of entire galaxies, who could be of immeasurable help in liberating your planet from domination by the Greys, if you could persuade them to intervene. However, they are unlikely to respond until an entity cleans up its own act and stops polluting the planetary environment. One can also send out telepathic signals of encouragement to those among the Greys who have begun to question authority and acquire a taste for human freedom, but it would be suicidal to attempt to fight the Greys directly with the weapons at present at your disposal. One must be rational in attempting to fight back, and understand the proper way to proceed. Your own consciousness is the most potent weapon that is available to you at the present time. The most effective way to fight the Greys is to change the level of your consciousness from linear thinking to multidimensional awareness. Your secret weapon, your ace in the hole, is that you are not hive mind collective thinkers, though many of you do fall into that category by conforming to conventional group patterns, and are therefore easily controlled by the Greys. Collective thought patterns among humans empower the Greys. It is your individuality which is your best weapon, because it is the one weapon you have that the Greys do not have. The major weakness of the Greys, their area of vulnerability, their Achilles heel, is their inability to think as individuals. They are an extremely telepathic high-tech society, but as individuals they are not creative thinkers. They take orders well, but they do not conceptualize well. They have the technology to throw your planet out of orbit, but there is one key ability that you have and they do not have, the ability to hold in mind imagery that inspires an individual to realize his or her direct personal connection to the source of all that is, which is the ineffable Godhead, no matter what name you may call it. That is your key to victory.